This is one of the stupidest cameras I have ever bought, and you should probably buy one too. What do you get when a Lomo toy camera and a digital point and shoot have a few too many cheeky ones and get a bit frisky one night and end up having a whoopsie daisy? Well, the answer to that question is a camera that I have actually been trying to find and wait for someone to make for so long. Because I first really fell in love with photography through the late 2000s, and then through the early 2010s is when I really started to dive into the world a lot deeper, and I quickly found a niche that I was really in love with: lomography. Which, if you don't know because you didn't happen to be in your early 20s during that kind of 10-year period, lomography is where we take something like these cheap plastic cameras called toy cameras that are made in China. They're really cheap, anywhere between $10 and $50, or in the case of the Diana, because this was kind of when a company started working out that this is a bit of a niche and started doing it, and they called themselves lomography, which I'm not sure what came first. I assume the term, then the company named itself that. But what you basically have is a plastic body with no electronics in it. There's a couple springs that I guess is how the shutter works. You have a couple of very small settings, a plastic lens in front, and you then get to put film through it because film doesn't require electricity, and you get this really fun lo-fi aesthetic. A lot of the early Instagram filters were really trying to emulate this sort of style of photography, and this is something that I really fell in love with because I quickly moved from being someone who was interested in photography to someone who was trying to make a living with cameras. And doing something like lomography was a really fun way to fall back in love with just the craft of photography without putting all the pressure of having to create a good looking image. And it was all just kind of about being in the moment, being fun, having fun with cameras, because photography is meant to be fun. But when I was doing this, it cost me like $2 a shot, because that happened to be during the period of time when film wasn't some sort of fun, retro, aesthetic thing that people get to do as a bit of a luxury. It was actually just a bit of an outdated technology. So it was really cheap. I kind of really got into it in this nice little zone where film was actually really cheap to shoot on. I was paying $5-6 for a roll of 120, which now is, the cheap rolls are like $20. And development was it was okay, maybe $10 a roll. And I, at the time, owned all my own stuff to develop, well, 35mm film. So I was doing all of my own 35mm development, and then 120 I could afford to pay for. And so it was kind of this fun, nice hobby, but now I wouldn't dream about doing that. I live kind of rurally where we don't really have a film lab around here. I can get 35mm done at Kmart, or about a 50-minute drive away is my nearest photo shop that could actually develop 120, which means that it's been 8 or so years since I've put a single roll through this. In fact, it actually has the last roll on it. It's got 2 shots left, and I've never taken them because I just know I'm never going to get this developed, because it's moved from being a couple dollars a shot all the way up to nearly $10 a shot.
Oh my God, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the?
And so that hit is something that I have been searching for. And I think this kind of current generation of photographers that are coming through don't really have their equivalent of, for me, what I have kind of been using as that intermediary are things like Micro Four Thirds cameras, like these early Olympus pens, or I've just bought actually an APS-C Sony body so that I can use some of my Sony lenses. But this sort of digital equivalent of lomography is really the thing that I have been chasing for so long. In fact, if I show you this here, this is my dream camera. I'll design it for you right now. This is a whiteboard marker, and I'm sure that will trigger no one. So here's me designing the camera. We have a full frame 35mm sensor. We then have a plastic disposable lens. We then put this in a camera body that has a shutter button, and this costs less than $50. Now the Camp Snap, which is what this video is about, isn't full frame, but it's starting to get really close to this sort of concept where we can actually pull somewhat of a decent resolution image with some of these just, for lack of a better term, bad optical qualities that actually make it really fun to shoot with. Like many digital toy cameras like this Peony, which I really like, except for the images that pull out of this are less lomography and a lot more Motorola Razr circa 2005, where it's not really made up of a decent image that's missing a lot of detail and has a lot of chromatic aberration. Instead, it's just kind of a mess of pixels. It just looks like a cheap webcam. But for the last year, I've been super head down, just working my butt off. I haven't really engaged that much with the wider photography or filmmaking landscape or really seen what's going on. And then as I've kind of re-engaged with it, turns out about a year ago, there was a camera release that I immediately had to jump on. Introducing the Camp Snap. The Camp Snap has a wide range of features, such as an on button, a flash button, and a shutter button. There's no digital display. You can't review your pictures. There is a tiny display where we can see the amount of shots that we have already taken. The megapixels on this exist. The lens is on the front of the camera. The viewfinder finds views for you. All right, the flash is actually pretty decent because it's actually just a modern LED. I guess the downside to that is it doesn't create that iconic disposable camera, horrible yellow hazed flash look. It actually looks kind of like I'm illuminated by a light source. In terms of touch and feel, when you pick it up, it really does feel like you're just picking up a disposable camera, for better or worse. It is a plastic body that I assume on the inside has one circuit board. There's no flap or anything to plug an SD card into. You can, with a screw, open it, put a micro SD card in there. I've never done that because it comes with one installed and I have just ripped this out of the box. You charge it with USB-C, you get your photos off it with USB-C. That is the entire range of features, but how does it perform optically? The images are actually pretty good in terms of what the sensor is outputting. And by that I mean compared to other toy cameras. The images that come out of this do look like they have been taken on something that is trying to take good photos. The lens quality, especially in decent light, is actually quite impressive. In fact, my main complaint about this camera is that the images in good light almost look too good. It looks a little bit like, I don't know how else to describe this, but a cheap Chinese dash cam that actually produces a decent image, where it does look really digital, almost too sharp. I almost think the way that this could be improved for what I'm trying to get out of it is to just replace this, I think, glass-ish pinhole lens with just a disposable camera lens. And then it's going to sort of be this really perfect hybrid between a digital camera and sort of replacing that need for just something that's simpler, that reminds you of the old days of just having a disposable camera in your pocket or a point and shoot. Now, it is worth mentioning that I am not the target audience of this camera. Well, at least initially. I think now Camp Snap really understand that dudes in beanies with beards and rounded glasses are exactly the sort of people who are buying these cameras now. But this was originally designed by the original designer just for his kids. He wanted his kids, when taking them away from camps, to have that same experience of just having a disposable camera where you just kind of hit go on the shutter button, it takes a snap, and then when you get home from your holiday, you then get to look back through all the memories, which is really funny because that's almost exactly the vibe that I'm trying to extract. It's just that it gets there in a slightly different way. If something like this is what the future of lo-fi photography looks like in potentially a future where film development becomes basically unfeasible, Even though in terms of film photography as a hobby, I'm actually fairly optimistic that it's going to stick around and even grow. But in a world where Kodak Gold is running me $20 a roll before development, if this is what the future of lo-fi photography looks like, I'm fairly confident there's going to be something for everyone. Even people like me who like shooting with stupid, shitty cameras. This is the fun kind of bad. In low light, it's actually decent, far more better than a disposable camera. You don't actually have to have the flash on when you're indoors. Dynamic range, who cares? I really wish if they do an iteration 2, doing some sort of film emulation in camera, maybe with even digital filters or something like that, would be really nice. I honestly think if I took a lot of these images out of this, I added a subtle blur, I added some additional grain emulation on top, they would look really bang on as disposable camera images. Now, it comes down to the all-important price. Considering this is just kind of a cheap camera sensor and a lens in a plastic body, you might expect this to be, I don't know, what, 20, 30 bucks? No, the Australian retail price of this is $129. I didn't pay that much for this. I got it on special for only $100, which is simultaneously ridiculous and somewhat passable. I guess that is getting you about 3.5 or 4 rolls of film before development. And for anyone international, that's roughly the equivalent of what this is, which, would I rather this or would I rather about 100 shots on film? Well, I have taken 194 shots on this week alone, so I'm definitely getting my value for money out of it from that aspect. I think to this sort of mid-market of photographer where we kind of take it seriously but kind of still just love raw photography, this fills a really fundamental need to just get inspired again by something that's just kind of silly fun. And because it's so lightweight and you also, even though it's a bit expensive for what it is, you kind of just don't really care about it too much. I've just strapped on a really basic wrist strap and it just goes in my jacket pocket. It's so lightweight that I don't notice it. And you can just whip it out in public, which without getting in trouble. And just when I'm down the street waiting for my partner to run into a shop or something, you can just sort of sit around and having a few happy snaps at some really low stress street photography. So would I recommend the Camp Snap? If after talking about it, you want one, you are the sort of person who will benefit from it. If hearing this, you go, I don't understand why people like this. It's just not for you. That's fine. You probably appreciate things like good looking photos. Not all of us are into photography for that. Let's see how that opinion goes down. But I personally think this is such a fun camera to have as an option to just grab and go whenever you're leaving the house. Fun fact, this video was originally a TikTok and I realized I had too much to say about this camera to condense it down into a minute or less. So here we are. I wasn't expecting to make this video. If you're new here and you like weird camera stuff, especially shitty cameras or bad lenses or cheap, weird budget camera stuff, or God forbid, good camera gear and making good content, well then you should probably hit subscribe. If not, thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Bye.